This is The Memory Palace. I'm Nate DiMeo. Come sit by the fire while still it burns bright. It'll tell you a tale in its flickering light. Of an outlaw, a man named Elmer McCurdy, sent to his maker when he was barely past 30. But not to his grave. That's a twist in the story. A tale that is twistful and wistful and gory. So let's sit 'neath the stars on some cool desert night, and I'll ask that you trust that I've got my facts right, as the yarn that I spin is just full-on bonkers, like an Old West saloon in the middle of Yonkers. But such are the ways that these stories go, tales of the West that start true and then grow, stretched by each teller, each ad-lib, each riff, till they're taller than redwoods and woven with myth. So I pledge here by the fire, before I begin, that I will try to honor the real man within. McCurdy was born in Washington, Maine. His mother was single and gave him her name, but told him that she wasn't his mother, that he was the child of the wife of her brother. She was worried about the way folks would talk, if they knew he had been born out of wedlock. But the secret, we're told, when he finally found out, sent him off to wallow in booze and self-doubt, and he grew as a sullen and ornery man, who wandered through life with no purpose or plan. He worked for some years as a miner for lead, a cruel and hard business that sickens your head. He could not hold the job, he was drunk and unwell, and thought he'd turn things around and go west for a spell. Westward he went, where his problems persisted. So he took that old route and up and enlisted, in hopes he learned virtue and upright self-discipline. But just learned about rifles, about nitroglycerin. Now this was all around 1905, when the dream of the West just barely survived, of freedom and outlaws and men who rode tall. And Elmer, it seems, wanted that, bought it all. So he left the army and soon joined the ranks of the outlaws and rustlers, and men who robbed banks. One guy was the muscle, another the brains. Elmer'd blow up the safes and the vaults on the trains. But he was bad at it. The others sure felt it. When he blew up one safe and the silver all melted. He did this 3 times, got his measurements muddled, and the explosion left all the silver bars puddled. One time, the gang chiseled into a vault just to have Elmer's nitro not blow up at all. They stood hands on ears and watched the fuse sizzle as it sparked across the floor to the safe, just to fizzle. They ran through the night with the law on their trail, cursing Elmer McCurdy again for a fail. There was a $2,000 reward for his head, and that sort of thing could make a man dead. And when Elmer holed up in a barn in a field, surrounded by lawmen, refusing to yield, the shootout lasted for more than an hour. And Elmer McCurdy died in the shower of bullets that flew, though it took just the one, to ensure that the life of poor Elmer was done. But his story still has a couple more acts, so let's move through them quick and stick to the facts. With a price on his head, the sheriff, of course, had to make sure he properly ID'd the corpse. So while he waited for someone to show up who knew it, he had Elmer embalmed, had him pumped up with fluid. And as Elmer just laid around, just not rotting, it seems that the sheriff somehow had forgotten to pay the undertaker for services rendered. So the funeral home took Elmer's body for tender. And thus started Elmer's second career when the funeral home charged a quarter to see him. The Oklahoma outlaw, the embalmed bandit, these were some new names that Elmer was handed. As he stood in the corner in a mummified state, or rolled across the floor, his boots strapped up with skates. For 4 years he stood there propped up in the back, while his body shrank and his skin all went slack, until his cousin shows up, outraged, and demands his body be sent to Arkansas City, which is weirdly in Kansas. The cousin, turns out, was no cousin of his, just a scammer who worked in the carnival biz. The outlaw who wouldn't be taken alive was a star on the Midway till 1925, a macabre reminder, an uncanny tie to a lost way of life in a time just gone by. But Elmer McCurdy was much worse for wear. He'd shrunk small as a boy and lost most of his hair. His skin looked like leather on his face and his neck, and the carny was relieved when someone showed up with a check. and Elmer McCurdy whiled away all his time in a wax museum devoted to crime. 50 years. That is how long Elmer spent, first on display, then in the basement. The dusty museum in the 50s went under. A mummified outlaw no longer sparked wonder. A Hollywood man by the name Sonny Singh bought the lot of wax figures with Elmer thrown in. He owned a museum on the Walk of Fame, with wax Gene Autry, Tom Mix, and John Wayne. But 2 Canadian men bought Elmer before he was given his star turnout on the floor. They had a schlocky museum near a big schlocky mountain. That's Mount Rushmore to you, and that's where they found him, missing his nose and 4 of his fingers. But that part's super gross, so I'm not gonna linger. But here's the thing. They didn't know Elmer was real. They thought he was a mannequin thrown in with the deal. Fast forward 3 years, to like 72. Gerald Ford has been swapped in for Agnew. And the cowboy heroes have faded from screens, replaced by De Niro, Pacino, McQueen. There's a show on TV about an astronaut, whom the government made half man, half robot. And one day they're shooting that show out of town, at a beach boardwalk fun park that was old and run down. And while the crew was there, preparing the set, they saw something that they would never forget. There in that 2-bit amusement park, as a part of a ride called Laugh in the Dark, was a dummy painted in bright red day glow that shone when a blacklight would hit it just so. And while the prop guys prepared the set for the show, a bone popped out of the dummy's elbow. So, the television crew called the cops. The coroner was called in to do an autopsy. And everyone pieced together the clues. It was in the paper in the 6 o'clock news that the dummy was an outlaw, gunned down when he ran, and found on the set of the $6 Million Man. I could end the story with a grave on Boot Hill, where he was eventually buried, and I hope lies there still. And that's a good ending, and a good place for him. But allow me a moment as the fire grows dim. These stories we tell, these tales of the West, the cowboys, the outlaws, I get it. They're the best. But I can't help shake Elmer, hanging there, painted red, in a dark ride in Long Beach, some 60 years dead. Mistaken for some dummy, for some plaster cast, instead of a person with dreams and a past. There's a moral here, about stories and history, how they get trumped up with drama and romance and mystery. These stories that we tell again and again often forget that there's real men within. This episode of The Memory Palace is written and produced by me, Nate DiMeo, with engineering assistance from Elizabeth Aubert. This show is part of Radiotopia from PRX and receives ad-serving technology from AdZerk and support from listeners just like you. Our ad music is composed by J.D. Sampson. I still haven't quite found the right fit for my part-time research assistant opening. If you think that might be you, if you are the fit, and you've got a history background and live in the LA area, send me a resume and a cover letter at nate@thememorypalace.us. Before I split, I want to encourage you to jump on the new season of Love and Radio while it's just getting started. If you've heard their stories on shows like Radiolab or This American Life, you are familiar with their unique storytelling that finds characters and ways of living that you just don't get to know otherwise. Their podcast is filled with stories that are uncensored and unflinching and fearless and humane and extraordinarily well done. Check out Love and Radio and all the other Radiotopia podcasts at radiotopia.fm. I'll talk to you guys in a couple weeks.
Radiotopia.